Welcome to the Embodiment Matters podcast with me, Erin Geesaman Rabke, and my beloved Carl Rabke. We don't have the luxury of living in ordinary times, but rather, we live in extraordinary ones, where the way we live in the next decade will make a huge difference in the future of life on planet Earth. We aspire in this tapestry of rich conversations drawn from a variety of wise perspectives and beings to share resources that can help you embody the wisdom, compassion, and skillful actions that are needed during these times. You can find out more about our classes, our 13-month depth training, Refugia, and sign up for our beautiful newsletter at embodimentmatters.com. We are 100% listener funded and ad free and invite you to consider becoming a supporter of this podcast with a donation. You can find more at embodimentmatters.com/podcast.
So welcome, listener friends. It's Carl and Erin here, and this conversation is the second in our series of 3 podcasts around practices of presence, practices of depth and soul, and practices of reconnection and remembrance and why they matter. And these are 3 primary threads that we'll be weaving through our 13-month Refugia depth training. So to begin with practices of depth and soul today, I want to bring a line from Michael Meade, who said, "Slow and down are the movements of soul." So just to let that land, slow and down. As you're listening, can you feel the ground? You feel yourself here? And can we step off the train of hustle and speed and too muchness that is so pervasive in our modern everyday life? And we invite you to dive into this mystery with us around what are practices of depth and soul and why do they matter? And I know for myself, I struggled a little bit with the word soul in the beginning. It felt like it had kind of a Christian connotation, like eternal damnation of your soul or something. And it wasn't until coming into contact with like Clarissa Pinkola Estes and James Hillman and Michael Meade and Francis Weller to really get like, oh, this is what soul is. So we're really excited to drop into this great living mystery around soul and depth together.
Thanks for that, love. Um, I'm thinking that though we're going to use words and talk about soul, there is something about a transmission and when you feel it, And I would invite listeners, if you haven't already, and even if you have, you might enjoy returning to some of our previous podcasts. If you listen to the interview Carl and I were grateful to be able to do with amazing poet and soul, Dr. Jaiya John, you will feel a transmission of soul in that episode. And also our interview with beloved poet and teacher Rosemerry Wahtola Trommer, you will feel a transmission of soul in the waters of those conversations. And we hope in this one too, as well as the people Carl mentioned earlier, Francis Weller and Michael Meade, who we've interviewed multiple times in the past, to really feel it. And I think what you said, Carl, about slow and down and close and also kind of back, like I felt myself feeling a breath in my back body and not just the hustle of pressing forward. Um, so thank you for that. I want to quote our dear friend, Francis Weller, from an interview. This is actually where I first discovered Francis's work many years ago. When The Wild Edge of Sorrow first came out, he was interviewed in the Sun magazine. And he says this: "I don't use soul in a religious sense, but rather the way psychologists Carl Jung and James Hillman and the romantic poets like Keats, Wordsworth, and Blake use it to speak of the experience of depth in our lives. Soul invites the marginal, the excluded, and the unwelcome pieces of ourselves into our attention. Soul is often found at the edges, both in the culture and in our lives. Soul takes us down into the places of our shared humanity, such as sorrow and longing, suffering and death. Soul requires that we be authentic, revealing what lies behind the image we try to show the world, including our flaws and peculiarities. Soul doesn't care at all about perfection or getting it right. It cares about participation. Soul is revealed in dreams and images, in our most intimate conversations, and in our desire to live a life of meaning and purpose. Isn't that gorgeous? Oh, it just drops me right into the richness of these waters.
Yeah, and as you were reading that, I really felt in my body this sense of gratitude for the marginalized, for the sacred limps, that this being human is not an endless ascension self-improvement project, but it's about intimacy. And I think of a line that Francis often quotes from James Hillman, that the therapeutic process is not about resolution, it's about spaciousness. It's about letting everything be there just as it is, that nothing has to be excluded, that nothing is outcast. And the parts that tend to be outcast or marginalized are actually where the goods are, where soul is called, or in the words of Jung, the way that our genius is so intimately entwined with our wounds and our struggles,
Mm.
which is so counter to how many of us are taught to approach ourselves, to approach life.
I just want to say, when you're talking about a sacred limp, this isn't just metaphorical for you.
Yes.
You say something about that, Carl, in case people think, you're cruising and it's all fine and that's a nice metaphor. I want you to say something about that.
Yeah, well, this was an interesting story on my sacred limp that has a long backstory, but I'll give the current version. So, just before I turned 50, I was toward a few years into COVID, and I was feeling this like, all right, I need to get back in shape, and had this aspiration to get my first legit dunk in basketball. And I was training and I was really deepening my strength. And Soul had a different plan for me. And I wound up tearing my Achilles tendon, this mythological injury. And the way it healed slightly long, so it didn't get me back to where I was before. But there is, it's something that continuously calls me and calls for my compassion and my listening and my presence. And it's sacred to me. It's an invitation and what's this is so interesting about this story is the day before I injured it, I was going to play basketball, and I had shared with you, Erin, I'm so grateful for having intermittent back pain in my life because it keeps me closest with what's most vulnerable. And it was as though the universe said, "Oh, really? Well, let's test that." And now this is my sacred limp that I get to work with as a movement teacher and as a mover. I have this soul injury.
Mm. I just find such a relief already as we're talking about this. Like, I can feel the slowing down. I can feel, and even speaking about soul, the way it lets us like shed the shiny masks of performing perfection and shiny, happy, everything is lovely. And I just want to name, this comes from to us from Francis Weller also speaking he uses the language that we live in a culture of ascension, where it's all about this story, at least the overculture's strong story is continual improvement. It just keeps getting better and better, and my practice makes me better and better. And, when that's not the story, there can be not the story, when that's not our experience, like you're saying with the limp, these inferior parts, these tender, vulnerable parts, to claim them as sacred and worthy of compassion and actually what connects us in our deep humanity. I love that phrase, the commons of the soul. Like, oh, at the honest root, we all share that kind of experience, of, where we feel awkward or um, injured or imperfect, and I'm just appreciating, I can feel it already, the sacredness that invites us down instead of to rise above. And it's not that I just want to say, we sometimes talk about the spirit soul continuum, and honoring soul in a culture where it's very underrepresented is really important. And it's not that spirit. I'm thinking of an image. I think this comes from mythologist Martin Shaw, where he talked about if spirit is a spark and a flame rising, soul is like the drops of water in the mud nourishing the roots. And they're both important, However, in this culture, a lot of it is very superficial, materialistic, competitive, consumeristic. So if you're connected even to spirit, hallelujah, it's better than not being connected. But giving spirit this grounding in soul feels so important and so underrepresented. And so, yeah, this is part of why we're weaving practices of depth and soul into this 13-month training and actually into everything we do in our lives and in our work. Um, yeah, making space for the sacredness of grief. And as I said, the places we feel awkward and inferior and tender, and honoring that as sacred um, just feels so holy and important to me.
Yeah. And I think it's important around that stretch of spirit and soul to recognize how incredibly biased our language is around that, that up is good and down is bad, that lightening is good and the dark is bad. And we get that in the body. There's this sense of like up, or like, oh no, I'm down, I'm depressed, and how there is such richness in the stretch. I often think of the line from the Zen tradition of, setting the 10,000 things down, and then in soul, it's like picking the 10,000 things up, and both are essential aspects, but that there is such a bias toward that rising, toward that accumulation, toward that ever-present improvement, and what can relax when we can step off of that train. I think of the line from Zen teacher Sherry Huber of how our self-hatred often uses self-improvement for self-maintenance, in the sense of like we're constantly trying to get away from parts of ourselves rather than like, oh, can I be with this tender, scared part, or this regret, or this sadness, or this holy, sacred grief that so many of us have not been taught how to be with, and how to be with in community, which is an important piece of soul work as well.
Thank you for that. I want to just add depth. We're already talking about it, but we name this about depth and soul. And as you were speaking about that like movement toward transcendence, that there's something so different when we're looking at depth. And I'm thinking of this line we often repeat to ourselves and each other and students and friends from beloved Irish poet, scholar, teacher, former priest John O'Donohue, who said so beautifully, so much of what troubles and delights you happens on a surface that you take for ground. And I just get this image of how so much of the culture is at this, I don't know, this crust, this superficial layer, and his beautiful language implies, hey, there's something underneath that that really, I'm so glad you named Clarissa too, because her language about the river under the river, you
Mm,
know, Rio abajo Rio is like what can really fund the deep meaning and creativity and satisfying kind of interactions with each other, with the natural world, with the unseen world.
mhm.
So yeah, depth also.
Yeah, and that reminds me too of Jaiya John and the title of his publishing house, Soul Water Rising, that with all that is happening on the surface and in the news, there are deeper undercurrents
Mhm.
of revolution and remembrance and people tapping into the depths. And I think one of the things that's important about soul in comparison to the kind of transcendence or oneness is this brilliance of uniqueness that we each are here as unique beings carrying a unique soul medicine that is necessary to meet this time. And we could go off on this topic for a long time around what is our unique soul medicine, or as Michael Meade would say, your unique irreplaceable genius, and what are practices and things that support that being offered to the world.
I love that so much. And just that soulful perspective that we don't come in blank, we come in gifted. And, you know, I'm thinking of both Mead and Francis have shared stories about being with Malidoma Somé, um, teacher from Burkina Faso, who in his village, Dagara village in Burkina Faso, there was this deep understanding that the role of the culture, the role of the village is to bless your gifts, actually to recognize them and bless them and support you to bring them forth. I almost feel a wave of tears coming with this, which is so different than in this modern world where, not everyone is born into a context where the people around them are recognizing their gifts, but instead, there can be this sense of having to hustle to prove you're worthy of some kind of belonging and some kind of welcome. And that is so sad, you know? And I love, you've talked about this before. You've used the word, Carl, about your genius goggles. Like, what would it be like if we wore the spectacles, the glasses, the lenses through which we're looking at each other to recognize, oh, what is this person's unique gifts and how could I bless, see it, reinforce it, bring it forth instead of the impoverished bullshit of like competing with each other or judging each other on
Yeah,
this
yeah.
on this surface level, you know?
Right. And that why would everyone try to look like the same Instagram influencer? But no, we want to look more like ourselves and feel more like ourselves and become more and more weird as we age and ripen. And I think especially with those genius goggles for looking at the youth,
Yeah.
because genius needs to be blessed, that it needs to be fed, and to have someone say like, hey, I see you. I see you have a knack for this, and let's find ways to feed that. And I mean, I have very vivid memories of these few times from a college professor or from a friend or someone who just pauses and says, like, I see this quality in you, and what fertilizer that is for becoming oneself.
Mm, it's so true. Um, and you were saying something very close to this, but I just want to name the potent question that Michael Meade has often asked, that we often ask, that we are in relationship with and want to share as well, which is, did you become yourself? No, that is a soulful question. Did you become yourself? There is no map. Nobody's ever done it before. There is only one you. And it takes tremendous courage to do that in this overculture. And it's so beautiful. I'm thinking again of Clarissa, one of her lines about during troubled times like these, one of the greatest things you can do is show your soul. Soul shines like light on deck during these dark times. And so let's do that courageously, may we all.
Yeah, and I think of that for any kind of mentor, teacher, artist that influences us. Like, are we aspiring to become more like them, or do we take what they light up in us to become more ourselves? And I feel like that's really a central role of a mentor, is to shine this mirror to someone of saying, like, you have your own unique genius, and may my gifts help you grow your own garden so that you may mirror that to those around you.
Mm, it's so beautiful. Um, oh, go ahead.
I think we should take a Stafford pause.
Oh, do it. Always the poetry.
So this is a little trio of poems around soul medicine that I love from William Stafford, great soulful poet who wrote a poem every morning. And this first one is The Way It Is. There is a thread you follow. It goes among things that change, but it doesn't change. People wonder about what you are pursuing. You have to explain about the thread, but it's hard for others to see. While you hold it, you can't get lost. Tragedies happen, people get hurt or die, you suffer and get old. Nothing you can do can stop time's unfolding. You don't ever let go of the thread. And just to pause for a moment and feel like what is a thread that has always been there for you? Sometimes clear, sometimes very murky, sometimes elusive, but something that is difficult to explain that has been this consistent thread.
Can I riff on that before you go on? Because John O'Donohue's with us today, tapping me on the shoulder again, and this feels connected with that. And I don't know why the word is relief again and again as we're talking about soul today, but when I repeat these words to myself, I get a great wave of relief. So O'Donohue said, "There is an unseen life that dreams us. It knows our true direction and destiny. We can trust ourselves more than we realize and need have no fear of change." That just points me back to that thread and like, oh, I can drop into that. Even if it's mysterious and what we call us, we don't know what it is. This unseen life has an intelligence and a calling, and we can come into relationship with that.
Yeah. Yeah. And going back to what you said earlier, Erin, that it's not about hustle or trying to prove ourselves or getting enough trainings or enough certificates to be like, oh, can I be worthy in the world? No, it's about this, like letting this unseen life dream us, letting this thread, like, can we tune more and more to who we are at those deeper levels?
Mm.
So the second one from Stafford is When I Met My Muse. I glanced at her and took my glasses off. They were still singing. They buzzed like locusts on the coffee table and then ceased. Her voice belled forth and the sunlight bent. I felt the ceiling arch and knew that the nails up there took a new grip on whatever they touched. I am your own way of looking at things, she said. When you allow me to live with you, every glance at the world around you will be a sort of salvation.
You got to give us that last line again.
I will. I am your own way of looking at things, she said. When you allow me to live with you, every glance at the world around you will be a sort of salvation. And I took her hand to imagine that your own way of perceiving, your own way of loving, your own way of learning could be a sort of salvation. Mm. I, again, goosebumps.
Mm.
Stafford. And this last one that is also connected with the first two. The things you do not have to say make you rich. Saying things you do not have to say weakens your talk. Hearing things you do not need to hear dulls your hearing. And things you know before you hear them, those are you. Those are why you are in the world.
Praise the poets.
Save the poets. Like, what are those things you hear where there's this bone knowing, like, oh, yes, something in me knew that. That's that unseen life.
Mm, it's so beautiful. I just have to say one more time, praise the poets. And there's so much soul and so much poetry. And I can't imagine making my way through this life or these times without reading a heck of a lot of poetry like this. But thank
Yeah,
you.
because it seems like that's the commitment to depth and what's under and what's under and what's that commons of the soul. I think that's where so many poets draw from and what feeds us so deeply when we hear poetry that touches that place.
I want to name something that I've been thinking about for a lot of months, and I actually started writing a piece um, the week before Charlie Kirk was assassinated, just an hour from where we're recording right now. And I was writing about opting out of the culture wars and dropping into the commons of the soul. And just want to name that again, connected with this, that when we're talking about soul, um, there's we don't need to do that other thing. The us and them, the divisiveness. We can feel in what we're talking about here that it is really what connects us at the roots. And it feels important to water those roots as well, not to ignore issues, but not to ignore the commons of the soul as well.
Hmm.
I want to mention, I'll just read this language as we wrote it on our page about refugia. Some of the curriculum we're going to be working with during our time together because it relates to that. And one facet we'll be exploring is learning to swim in dark waters. And what I want to name before I read the rest of this is I'm having a memory, Carl, of when you and I, Alexandre and Aliona, last summer had just completed our beautiful 4-day grief ritual. And then we're just asking in that big circle of about 50 people, how many of you ever had any education in your childhood, in your growing up, about how to be with grief, how to work with grief and sorrow? And of course, not one person. Many of us have sought that out in our aging, our aiming toward um, becoming ripened adults and elders. But this is also hugely underrepresented
Hmm.
in the overculture. So the rest of this learning to swim in dark waters, honoring the gates of grief. And I want to bow to Francis Weller for articulating the 5 gates of grief. You can hear about those in our podcast with him or read about them in his beautiful book, The Wild Edge of Sorrow. And the apprenticeship with sorrow, which also comes from Francis. And I love to deepen into this and have taught courses about taking up this long, slow apprenticeship with sorrow, not as something to transcend and get over and fix or sweep under the rug, but as an inevitable companion in our lives, and learning how to be with grief and sorrow in such a way that our hearts actually become more tender, larger, rather than more twisted and hard and defended, and that we can be with grief and sorrow in a way that makes them beauty to bless others in our community, in our lives.
Yeah.
And
Can I just add one thing to that
yeah,
before you go on
of
to the
course.
next? Is it connects to what you were saying about the commons of the soul too, that regardless of political preference, skin color, anything like there is this commons of loss that
Yeah.
we share as human beings living in this impermanent world. And what a sacred thing to tend. Like, oh, this is a common denominator of humanity. When
Mhm.
we can feed this, how much it calls out to what is the same rather than what is different.
Mhm. And I just want to riff on that before I go back to reading the rest of this about, on the spirit end of the spectrum, when we overemphasize that side, we can be made to think you just didn't manifest well enough. Oh, you're having this loss and this sorrow. What's wrong with you? You're not doing life right. And the sacredness of soul acknowledges the truth that, you know, as we contemplate in the Buddhist tradition, everything that is born is impermanent and bound to die. So, how could we not inevitably be brokenhearted if we dare to ever open our hearts to others, to this beautiful world, and honoring that as sacred instead of a pathology or a problem or our fault or, um, yeah, a glitch. This is built in. So the rest of this says, um, I'll repeat this last part. Honoring the gates of grief, the apprenticeship with sorrow, and essential rituals of release. So I just need to name this again before I read the rest. How to lay down the heaviness of what comes at us every day if we're paying any attention to the news right now and in our own lives. So rituals of release are so
Mhm.
important as well. And then honoring the sacredness in our seasons of descent and claiming dignity as a member of the great clan of the brokenhearted. That's just so beautiful. I could weep right now.
Mhm.
Dignity in our brokenheartedness. And for me, this actually connects with the beautiful bodhicitta teachings from the Buddhist tradition that we're very steeped in, that says bodhicitta means the awake heart. And the awake heart hurts inevitably. How could it not? It's achy to be awake to the suffering in this world. And that's not a bad thing. That's a tender, paying attention, awake, mature kind of heart.
Yeah. Yeah. And when we were speaking of rituals of release, um, again, just reflecting on these are really challenging times. And what we're being invited to hold and metabolize, and what on some levels we've become acclimated to, are extraordinary burdens. And what supports us in both letting experience move through us so that we can release, we can let the earth support us. We cannot be holding all the news stories in our jaw and in our eyes and in our hearts and in our bodies, but we can feel and have body practices to let ourselves release, to have community rituals to let ourselves metabolize experience. But I know it's for both of us, it's a challenge and it requires consistent practice, like brushing teeth or washing hair to digest and metabolize all that we're taking in on a daily basis.
Yeah, soul hygiene. And to do that together, I'm so excited for Refugia, for having this weekly drumbeat of these reminders because it's so easy to get lost in the impoverished stories that are fed to us from mainstream. Martin Prechtel wouldn't call it culture, he would call it civilization. So, mainstream civilization, I'll call it that. I have a poem tapping me on the shoulder about this learning to swim in dark waters. This is Jennifer Wellwood, The Dakini Speaks. And the Dakini, well, I'm not going to go off on that tangent. Look it up if you want to. Here we go. My friends, let's grow up. Let's stop pretending we don't know the deal here. Or if we truly haven't noticed, let's wake up and notice. Look, everything that can be lost will be lost. It's simple. How could we have missed it for so long? Let's grieve our losses fully like ripe human beings. But please, let's not be so shocked by them. Let's not act so betrayed as though life had broken her secret promise to us. Impermanence is life's only promise to us, and she keeps it with ruthless impeccability. To a child, she seems cruel, but she's only wild, and her compassion exquisitely precise, brilliantly penetrating, luminous with truth. She strips away the unreal to show us the real. This is the true ride. Let's give ourselves to it. Let's stop making deals for a safe passage. There isn't one anyway, and the cost is too high. We are not children anymore. The true human adult gives everything for what cannot be lost. Let's dance the wild dance of no hope.
Mm.
That is a fierce and gorgeous soul
Yeah.
poem.
Mm.
Mm. Mm.
Yeah, as you read that, I'm just so grateful for the mythopoetic view. And we've talked about this a lot of there are different ways that people describe the times we're in. Uh,
Mhm.
the meta crisis, the collapse from Joanna Macy, the business as usual, just this earth consuming, planet destroying, supremacist, fascist growth, like all of that. But when we can get into these, that we're in a larger story, like the great turning, the great remembering. And if we look at these stories like Lord of the Rings or Harry Potter or Lyra Belacqua, like they are in similar places to where we are. And people get cooked in themselves. Their medicine comes out through these challenging situations. And to feel that we are not here by accident in these times, and that there is something that we bring to this time, something that emerges from this time that we're in, and that we can each tend what is ours to tend rather than trying to fix the whole situation, that there's something close that we can care for and become refugiate, become places where pockets of life are protected and pockets flourish amidst all that is collapsing, unraveling, being
Mm.
destroyed.
So beautiful. I am just thinking as you said that, it was a year and a half, close to 2 years ago. Actually, a year and a half. It'll be 2 years this fall. My dear friend Leilani Navarra and I got to go to the 20th anniversary gathering of the International Council of 13 Indigenous Grandmothers who gathered in New Mexico. It was a really extraordinary experience to be with them. And we were just talking about this over New Year's, that as the grandmothers got up, they shared, what I never heard in that gathering was, why would you have children at a time like this? That was just absolutely not. their perspective of these indigenous great grandmothers, grandmothers, mothers, and they said to a person how an elder, a grandmother, a parent took them aside and said, "Listen, you are not here for nothing. You are here with gifts for a reason and to be a voice for the voiceless, like the waters or the animals." I feel tears behind my voice saying this because um, what do we get in on the surface we take for ground of modern civilization? Like you're here to make a living and compete with other people and try to act like you have your shit together. I don't know, but there's something for me in this and it's not like the hero story. Like, you're not here for nothing. You're the hero that has to fix the entire world. It's like you, as we all do, have sole responsibilities to care for this life and to bring forth your unique gifts on behalf of, I got Martine here, also Martine's words, who would say, seeding a time of hope beyond our own, a time we might never see. That is a soulful approach to these VDTs, very difficult times. Like, to, we never know what the outcome might be, but how can we use our life force to plant some soul seeds that might sprout who knows when? To support others, even in looking at each other to say, and to the kids, to the youth. We were having this conversation with our teens on New Year's Eve to say, hey, you're not here for nothing. And that's true of everyone who's listening to this, and yeah, and I want to name another facet of this soulful part of our Refugia curriculum that we're going to bring, which is like the river flows. Let the waters of your unhindered expression flow and free your soul's deep song. We will sing and write and speak and move and share to be yourself more free. Gotta thank Rilke for this line, carried by the grace of no forcing and no holding back. So just blessing our uniqueness. And so many of us have so much shame around singing, writing, speaking, moving, sharing, because we think we got to do it perfectly or compete or be the best or all that bullshit that feeds nothing. We can compost that, give that back, let the great mother underfoot compost that, and then free. What is our unique voice? How do we want to speak and share and be?
Yeah, and when it's not a context of performance, like, oh, if my writing is good, I'll be okay. If my voice is on key, but know that there's a birthright of creative generativity that is there, like this spring.
Yeah, it's so beautiful. I'm so excited for that. And you have so much good stuff, Carl, around the singing and voice and freeing that with your Musica de Circolo and working with Bobby McFerrin and so many, you know, just doorways into freeing the voice. I'm really excited that we're going to bring that too.
Yeah. Well, and I think I have good experiential evidence, having identified for most of my life as not having rhythm, not being able to sing, like many of us carry if we're not part of an orchestra or a chorus or something. And like very similar to working with movement, the process has been remembering, like dusting off what gets in the way of my inherent rhythm, of my inherent melodic intelligence, that these are things that are layered over, but kids have vocal intelligence. You don't hear babies crying half-assed. It moves, sound moves through them, movement moves through them, and we have the same capacity as adults when there's a context of learning, which I have to give a deep bow to George Grant, who Erin and I, we both worked with 30, almost 30 years ago, with creative vocal toning in Salt Lake City. And it was the first time that I could be in a context where I made sound and music that was joyful and not performative. And what has flowered out of that, I'm deeply grateful for.
Me too. Thanks for naming George. Yeah, I love that. I want to read one more piece, which we're going to bring, and this is a big part of, I just want to say part of this is soulful, and part of the intention of Refugia is really about ripening adults and the wise elders that are needed in the world. And I just want to say, this does not have anything to do with becoming perfect. Never met a perfect human being yet. I'm not really holding out for that to happen. We all have our gifts and our flaws, and we can ripen into more mature adults and elders. And an essential part of that is understanding that this life is not just for me getting what I want. It is really for one, unfolding our potentials and our unique gifts that we come in with on behalf of serving life. Not that we are the hero and the only one. This is understood in a context that this is true for everyone, to touch the part of the fabric, the web of interbeing, the web of life where we are, and, restitch it, reweave it with our unique gifts. So this piece we titled Embodying Your Soul Medicine and Becoming Visionary. So I'll read this and then we can riff on it. Another world is possible. Liberate your unique gifts and dream a beautiful future into being. Water the roots of adult presence and become a ripening elder the world so needs. So I think, I was just reading something recently about the tech billionaires who have a vision of doom and us just rolling over and, oh, this is just how it's going to be. We're moving in this fascist, technocratic direction. No, I think for so many of us, to really honor the intelligence in our soul's protestation against that. So when we say another world is possible, what kind of future would you like to see? What would you like to be normal in the world now and in the future? Just even to let ourselves dream that instead of just bemoaning what sucks is so healing, I think, to stretch those imagination and visionary muscles.
Mhm.
Not that we know what's going to happen, but that we can trust this unseen life that dreams us, that wants to see people with health care and housing and not such a great um, accumulation of wealth among the very few, and then this great disparity of and suffering that results from that. Another world is possible. And I think, not that any one of us is going to figure this out by ourselves. This is communal, but liberating our gifts and dreaming a beautiful future. Not that it's going to be perfect. Earth never is. Here we are in samsara, but we can tip it, as when I've held this phrase in my heart since we interviewed Mark Nepo a few years ago, and he talked about tipping the scales, tipping the scales toward goodness, toward more loving, toward more empathy and more care for our greater body, which is the earth and all her creations. Um, so I want to pause there and see if you want to riff on that before we go into adult presence.
Yeah, well, I just appreciate what comes to mind is Pat McCabe, wonderful elder of our times, has written extensively on this, on our co-creative responsibility and the capacity for dreaming into another world. And I think we rely on a lot of reductionist default imagination of the overculture of it's just going to be billionaires retreating into bunkers on Kauai while the world blows up. And what are other possible what could be composted out of what's happening right now? And to really trust or open to the possibility that you have a unique vision that is being dreamed through you by the earth that wants to thrive and live in a good way. Like what would the world be like if your unique imaginal imprint was really necessary right now? And I hold that vision.
I think it's so exciting to have planned time out from the busy life to lean into this direction also, to really say this is worth spending some time pausing to nurture that dream, to blow on those embers of what matters to us in the midst of
Yeah.
the busyness and the overwhelm.
Yeah, because I will say, as we said in the last podcast around practices of presence, that the pace and speed and lack of imagination of so much of modern culture sucks dry the experiences of depth and soul. It's like, oh, that was in your imagination. What happened in that ritual or that vision quest or that song wasn't really real. Here's what's real. And the way that we can be pulled toward the surface and yeah, like that richness of soul mythopoetic is under constant threat, I think, and it needs feeding and it needs protection
Mm.
and it needs community because when we can mirror like, oh, this actually is how it is, then it becomes more real. And I think that's a big part of this as well, is to be able to be in places where we can speak this and not have someone doubting your dream or saying like, oh, that's not real, but oh, that unseen world is just as real as what's, on the daily headlines.
Mhm. And I have Clarissa's phrase coming back again, the river under the river, that really can feed and fund meaningful life, you know? Um, and speaking of the river under the river, the next part I want to talk about is that watering the roots of adult presence and becoming a ripening elder, not becoming perfect, but becoming adult and maybe an elder. And I just want to say again, part of eldering is decentering the self and recentering life and our unique role in relationship with supporting life. I said this in our conversation with Alexand on the podcast not that long ago, but there's something in me. This is one of my threads or something that has claimed me, which is from the time I was young, I was always looking around. Where are the wise elders? Just knowing that there was an absence, that they should have been there. And I don't remember if I quoted this in our podcast with him, but I have a vivid memory of being a kid, probably in the 80s, and seeing the bumper stickers that adults around me had on their cars that said, "He who dies with the most toys wins." That is so heartbreaking and nauseating to me because those are the adults who are destroying the world right now in positions of power, want to have the most toys, want to have the most accumulation for themselves. And even that stupid idea of winning, you know? Um, so let's talk about what is it to I'm talking about it a bit. I want to invite you too, babe, about adult presence because this also is very underrepresented in the overculture.
Yeah. Well, this is something that I appreciate that Francis often talked about in any emotion. It doesn't really matter what it is, but the capacity to distinguish who's holding this. Is it the adult or is it the child part of consciousness? Because there's a lot of talk about reclaiming the inner child, but it's an important capacity to know what is adult presence. What does it feel like, whether it's around money or sex or in being in conflict? Is the one who has the steering wheel an adult that can care for the ones in there, or is it the child that's trying to get this child's needs met? Um, so that as kind of like an internal gauge is something because most of us have not grown up in cultures with structures of rites of passage and initiation where we are carried and cooked and have initiations where we leave this child and then we step into a new identity with a new name and new responsibilities. So many of us are piecing it together through rituals and mentorship and learning. Um, and then I also think another thing about adults, as you said, Erin, is this shifting from what can I get out of this situation, this relationship, this life, to what can I offer? How can I live my life as a prayer? And how can that prayer include the more than human world, include 7 generations down the line, that there is a sense of the future ones being held in my activities and my considerations. It feels like, yeah, shaking off that uh, constrictive coat of individualism and self and me.
That's so good. I love talking about this so much. Okay, I want to be the quote nerd that I am and share some quotes that are coming to mind from important teachers for us. So, of course, one is from our dear Francis Weller. And if you've listened to our podcast, you've certainly heard this before, but it bears repeating. The task of a mature human being is to hold grief in one hand and gratitude in the other, and to let yourself be stretched large by them. It is so beautiful and so essential and so such a task. That's an apprenticeship to learn how to do that, right? The other quote that comes to mind is from Moshe Feldenkrais, who we didn't hear this until years into working as Feldenkrais practitioners, but a colleague of ours said, "Oh yeah, Moshe said, um, how did he say it? A mature human being is one who has removed outer authority from their inner lives." And reappropriated their own inner authority. And that's not a rebellious inner authority that's just fighting against everyone else. That's kind of a young part. But the mature, running it through our own, as I say, bullshit detector, truth and beauty resonators in my own body. Does this resonate for me? Does this match my values? And not to just let ourselves be run by unexamined conditioning from either our childhood or the overculture. We sometimes talk about this, and I think this is so one of the magnificent things that I love about the Feldenkrais method is that we can also do this at the level of our soma, our moving bodies. And we use these movement lessons. Amazingly, you can do this to remove outer authority from your inner life. Like right now, there might be a way you're holding your belly in because when you were 8 years old in ballet class or whatever, somebody said, you must hold yourself like this. Or here's a common one, especially for maybe for more than just women or people socialized in that way, to sit and hold your knees together because that is how a good girl sits. You could not let your legs relax. Maybe you want to choose to hold your legs together or to hold your belly in, but to let that come from choice rather than these outer authorities that are haunting our inner lives, our movement, how we hold our very bodies. So that also feels really important to name, as well as the way in which we approach teaching and learning. We don't want to be anybody else's inner authority. Please, God, don't make us your authority. This is about us waking up and becoming adults in community together.
Yeah, beautiful.
Hmm. Soul, baby, soul.
Mm. The real revolution, as Jaiya John says, is
Mhm.
in the soul, is in the soul.
Yes.
Thank you so much for listening. We hope you enjoyed the conversation. If you enjoy this podcast, it's great if you want to share it with friends or post about it on social media. Also, you could make a donation to support the podcast or find out more information about our classes and offerings at our website, embodimentmatters.com.